the Colorado Latino Agenda, a statewide nonpartisan public research initiative co-led by Voces Unidas as well as Color that publishes relevant and timely in-depth reports about Latinos in Colorado. This is our fourth year publishing this report, and we are excited to share some of the highlights and our takeaways with you. Here to talk through the data is Dr. Gabriel Sanchez, whose team at BSP Research conducted the poll and provided analysis for the fourth straight year. Dr. Sanchez, thank you.
Thank you much, Alex. It's a great pleasure to be able to be a partner with you, Dusty, both of your teams. Again, the fourth survey that we've been able to really track the overall policy attitudes of the Latino population across the state of Colorado. I'll tell you a little bit about the methodology before rolling through a deck that provides the high points of a lot of content that we have in this year's poll. You see very robust overall sample size of 1,600 Latino registered voters across the full state of Colorado, overall margin of error of 2.4%. And you see we were in the field for a month, July 5th to August 5th, which is a bit long for most surveys. I will say we need that time to make sure that we capture a representative sample across the full state of Colorado, not just those in the Denver metro area, not just those that want to take the survey. I looked at the data in prep for this presentation. We actually contacted some folks in follow-ups up to 5 to 7 times to make sure we didn't just get people who like to take political surveys, but again, that the data was representative. We use a blended approach, including web-based interviews and telephone interviews. Our team at BSP always does fully bilingual survey methodology. So you see we had a robust sample of 339 Spanish speakers, and we had good distribution across both web-based and telephone respondents. At the end of the day, we always match the demographics of the sample to the U.S. Census's CPS survey to make sure, again, that it's representative of the population. I'll say if you take a look at the breakdown of the gender distribution, 52% female, 48% male. The age distribution, you see good representation across all age groups. Again, ensures that we have a representative sample of the population. So when you see the data points, you can say that is representative of all Latino registered voters across the state of Colorado. As I'll show you a little bit, in the next slide, we have oversamples of rural regions of the state to ensure, again, that comparisons can be made across the full state's population, not just in the Denver metro. I want to draw your attention to the partisanship distribution of the sample over time. One of the values of having partners like Voces and Color that are very interested in seeing data over time of the Latino community, we can look at trends across the last 4 years. And one of the things that I want to point out is you do see a modest shift among Latinos in Colorado moving from independent to Republican. You see roughly a 5% shift from 2023 to 2024. That is real. It's outside of the margin of error. But Colorado is definitely not Texas or Florida, where you're seeing much greater movement towards the Republican Party among Latino registered voters. Again, big thing I want to highlight of the overall sample is we did a very good job this year, as we always do, in ensuring that we have a very robust distribution across the full state of Colorado, not just in the urban areas where it's much easier to poll individuals. You see we had oversampling in rural areas that really provides the opportunity to make comparisons across both quadrants of the state. You see, for example, 321 completed interviews with Latino registered voters in the Western Slope alone. You see also distributions across congressional districts. That's one thing that we really wanted to improve on with this year's sample relative to past years, is making sure every single congressional district had enough respondents to be able to break those individuals out within the crosstabs. You see we have very robust sample sizes in CD1, CD3, and huge sample size of 354, we know in the very salient Congressional District 8. Every policy poll provides the opportunity to tackle the top policy issue priorities of the Latino registered voting population across the state of Colorado. One of the things that we all agree we want to make sure happens with each of the policy polls is being able to remove the excuse you often hear from folks that if we only knew what the Latino electorate in Colorado wanted, we could be more responsive to their interests. Well, that is done for you with this poll. We ask individuals for both the top state level priorities, and we also ask them a very similar question, but cue federal priorities. When we focus on state level priorities, you see consistent with last year's poll, economic concerns continue to be the top priorities for Latino voters in the state of Colorado. You see almost half, 47% of the population identify addressing the rising cost of living or inflation as one of their top priorities, improving wages and income. At number 2, creating affordable and attainable housing, homelessness, and lowering healthcare costs all round out the top priorities for Latinos. So you see very much salient issues related to not only the economy overall, but at the individual level, I would say pocketbook issues. How are individuals and families doing as it relates to their own economic standing? And you also see just outside of the top tier issues, addressing gun violence and mass shootings as a top priority at 17%. And I also want to draw your attention to 11% who indicate expanding and protecting reproductive health and abortion rights. We know that was a huge issue for Latino voters in Colorado in 2022. It's shaping up to remain that way as we move forward closer to the November election. Similar story in terms of economic concerns being the top priorities for Latino voters when we cue specifically the federal government and Congress and president addressing the issues that are most important to the Hispanic or Latino community. Very similar story, addressing the cost of living or inflation, improving wages and income, lowering healthcare costs, etc. All essentially similar story to the state level. Latinos are concerned not just with the overall standing of the economy, but again, at the individual and family level, how are my healthcare costs going to be improved as a priority, for example, creating affordable and attainable housing for me and individuals like me. Very much, I would say, pocketbook-oriented issues are a top concern for the Latino population in Colorado. Other thing that I want to draw your attention to, right? Obviously, we want to focus on immigration policy, which we know over time has been a salient issue to Latino registered voters here in the state of Colorado. When you combine protecting immigrant rights and immigration reform at 17%, with the 13% who indicate increasing border security and limiting immigration, you see overall at 30%, that jumps immigration to the top tier level of priorities among Latinos in Colorado. Given the high level of salience of economic issues to Latinos in Colorado, whether we ask them about the state or the federal level, we wanted to do a deep dive on how Latinos are faring economically across the state. Similar question we've asked every 4 years to be able to track this over time. Over the past 12 months, would you say that your financial situation has generally gotten better, stayed about the same, or gotten worse? Nearly identical. I think within 2 percentage points to last year's poll, we see that there's essentially 3 separate economic sub-communities of the Latino population in Colorado. A third of those individuals indicating their economic situation has stayed about the same, a third indicating that things have gotten better, and the other third indicating, unfortunately, that their financial situation has gotten worse. You see, when we look at breakouts across this question, unmarried Latinos and those making under $40,000 a year annually, which is the lowest income category in our breakouts, are more likely to say that they are worse off than they were in the last year, while those with 4-year college degrees and making over $80,000, so those on the higher end of the socioeconomic scale, are doing better financially. So you see, unfortunately, a lot of Latinos in the state of Colorado are still struggling, are still waiting to see the economy turn in a positive way for them and their family. One of the most eye-popping statistics, I think, every year from the policy poll is how little Latinos have in savings that can be used for emergencies. A lot of discussion at the national level about American households dwindling their underlying savings to deal with emergencies. You see the very similar story for Latinos here in the state of Colorado. In fact, over half, 56% of Latino registered voters have $1,000 or less in their savings account to deal with the emergency. I'll say that again, over half, 56% of Latino registered voters. I would suspect that number would be even significantly higher if we were looking at the full population, including the unregistered population. So it gives us a strong word of caution that a large segment of the Latino population in Colorado still needs financial support, whether that's through direct cash payments, tax breaks, etc., to be able to weather a continuing struggle economically for all Americans, but specifically Latinos here in the state of Colorado. One of the big themes, if you paid attention to the policy poll in prior years, has been housing. We know housing costs in the state of Colorado, especially in the Denver metro area, have skyrocketed over the past 4 years that we've been tracking this data. So we wanted to take a look at how Latinos feel the policymaking community has addressed affordable housing in their community. Last year, we had a very robust set of questions looking at a range of policy items related to housing. Essentially, This year, we wanted to see if any of the policy interventions are actually being felt positively by Latinos in the state of Colorado. You see 55% of Latino registered voters overall do not think that elected officials have been effective at addressing the housing crisis. So still a lot of work to be done by elected officials across the state to address the needs of Latinos to be able to afford, whether it's rent or mortgages, affordable housing in the communities in which they live. You see broken out by congressional district. And again, we have enough sample size in every single congressional district this year to make these breakouts on any of these items. And you see it's important to see variation. Well, there's a near mirror parallel, 48% versus 47% in the highly salient congressional district 8. In other congressional districts, CD5, CD6, and CD4, CD3, for example, you see much higher rates of Latino registered voters indicating they do not feel elected officials have been effective at addressing the housing crisis. So you see much more work to be done on this issue, something we will continue to pay close attention to in the years ahead. We also focus every single policy poll on health and reproductive justice. We know this is a critically important issue to Latinos in the state of Colorado, and particularly our Latino community. One thing that we really wanted to highlight this year overall within healthcare, but specifically when thinking about access to abortion care, is Medicaid. States across the country are turning to Medicaid dollars to be able to address social determinants of health issues, including being able to utilize those funds to address access to abortion care. You see, when we asked respondents, low-income people may not be able to afford safe and legal abortion because it is not covered under Medicaid. Do you support insurance and government plans like Medicaid being able to pay for safe and legal abortions, just like all other healthcare services? You see a robust 68% of Latinos support utilizing Medicaid funds to pay for abortion care and ensuring access to all individuals, regardless of what their overall income level looks like. I love to be able to point out the distributions across different subgroups of the population, whether we're talking about rural residents of the state, those that live in urban or suburban areas, whether we talk about liberal, moderates, or conservatives, the majority of all those subgroups of the population all support being able to ensure individuals have access to affordable abortion care through Medicaid dollars. Even you see the majority of Latino Republicans at 56%. So this is an issue that's nonpartisan, both sides of the aisle, all ideologies would like to see this happen. We also ask a more general question regarding support for reproductive health care, and you see that overwhelmingly at 77% of all Latino registered voters across the state want to see everyone, regardless of their immigration status, being able to have access to reproductive health care. This is consistent with all the polling we've done on this project over the last 4 years. Latino registered voters in Colorado want to see individuals have basic resource access, again, regardless of their immigration status. You see variation across congressional districts, the highest levels being in CD2 and CD8, but across the board, even the lowest in CD4, it's still a robust 65% of Latino registered voters in Colorado want to make sure everybody, regardless of immigration status, has access to reproductive health care. In this year's survey, we took a deep dive on all the different amendments to the state constitution, including Amendment 79. Shall there be a change to the Colorado Constitution recognizing the right to abortion and in connection therewith, prohibiting the state and local governments from denying, impeding, or discriminating against the exercise of that right and ensuring the allowance of abortion? You see, again, 61% relative to only 28% in opposition to Amendment 79. So you see, among Latino registered voters across the state of Colorado, high support for Amendment 79. As I noted at the onset, when we're talking about Latinos in the state of Colorado, we know we need to include content on immigration and immigration justice, something we've tracked in a number of different battery of items over the years. This time around, we wanted to look at support for executive orders. Last year's poll indicated that the Latino registered voter population in Colorado strongly supported allowing President Biden to utilize executive orders to deal with access issues related to immigrants and being able to ensure that immigrants have a safe transition point to citizenship status here in the country and in the state of Colorado. This year, we wanted to look at specific support for Biden executive orders. You see a robust 72% of Latino registered voters in the state of Colorado believe that they support President Biden's most recent executive order that expedites work visas for DACA holders and dreamers who have a college degree and a job offer. I'll say that includes the vast majority of even Latino Republicans support that executive order. Similar support at 68% for President Biden's most recent executive order, making it easier for some undocumented spouses of U.S. citizens to legalize their status. So again, consistent with all our polling among Latinos in the state of Colorado, they want to see individuals who are hardworking and who live in the state of Colorado be able to have access points to citizenship status and permanent legal residency. Across a wide range of more state-level issues, you see wide support for humane immigration policies. I will characterize what you see in front of you across all this battery of immigration items, that at the end of the day, we see wide support for things that are rational, right, make common sense, and that treat immigrants in a humane way. Whether that's the 75% who support increasing legal immigration through family and employment-based visas, 72% for increasing the number of immigration judges to shorten case processing times to make sure folks be able to get in front of a judge quickly, 68% providing asylum to immigrants fleeing violence or war in their home countries. You see very, very high level of support for, again, those humane and what I would refer to as commonsensical immigration policy issues. Less support once you start moving into more different levels of issues that are not seen among Latinos as humane and supportive of the immigrant community. Whether that's 47% under the 50% threshold, forcing Mexico and other countries to use their military to stop large numbers of immigrants from reaching the U.S.-Mexico border. You see very, very little support at 38% for building of the 2,000-mile wall, quote unquote, building of the wall. Very little support at 36% for deporting all undocumented immigrants already living in the country. Similarly, low support for changing the Constitution to deny citizenship to children born in the U.S. if their parents are not U.S. citizens, and almost no support for making it a crime to travel with undocumented people, including, you see, states proposing making it a crime to travel with your own family members who might not be documented. Latinos in Colorado have very, very strong opposition to those levels and styles of policy. And you see only 20% support, vast majority, 75% oppose separating families at the border. Flip side of that, you see very, very strong support for what we would refer to as justice-oriented immigration or immigrant-focused policies. 75% requiring all emergency notifications to be sent across the state in Spanish and other languages. Again, recognizing that we want to make sure these basic level and important level of services are available to everybody, regardless of whether or not they're dominant English speakers or Spanish speakers. 74% creating a language justice office, which would require state agencies to deliver services in Spanish and other languages. You all know in Colorado, you're already a leader in having an office at the state level focused on new members and immigrants to the state of Colorado. This would take it a step further and again, make sure there's a language justice office to support that segment of the population. 70% support for improving protections to prevent discrimination of Latinos when accessing public services and other county governments that pass anti-sanctuary resolutions, making sure there's safeguards in place. So I won't go through all of these for you. You see strong support essentially across the board for what we would refer to as policies that support justice for the immigrant community here in the state of Colorado. We also obviously want to touch on education issues. Last year's poll had a lot of content focused specifically on education at the state level. Here, obviously, a lot of conversation nationally and within the state of Colorado across safety and ensuring that all of our students are safe when they're at school. You see high levels of support at 65% from school districts banning immigration enforcement agencies from campus to make sure that our immigrant students feel safe and their families feel safer when they're taking their children to school. But the flip side of that is not very strong support for policies that might on their face seem like good things to keep our students safe, but might have disproportionate and negative consequences for Latino students. That includes random backpack searches by school administrators, recognizing that Latino students might be searched more than white students. You see only 38% support for that intervention. Similarly, 44% support for placing police officers or school resource officers, SROs, in schools. Again, Latinos recognize that unfortunately those policies might disproportionately harm Latino students who might be disciplined and punished more than white students, which is what the national level data, as well as that in Colorado, says already is happening, unfortunately, across our school population. Rounding out the back end of the slide deck for you today are environmental justice policies. Again, something we track every single policy poll among Latino registered voters here in Colorado. You see 79% support for creating a new state fund to address the poor quality of water in mobile home parks. I'll give credit to our partners for making sure all individuals, including those who live in mobile home parks, are tracked with policy in our data. And you see consistently Latino
Did Dr. Sanchez freeze for everyone?
I think he did.
I'll continue.
Give him a minute. Thanks.
I'll continue on his behalf until he joins. No relation, by the way, Alex Sanchez here with Voces Unidas. But 79% obviously of registered voters support creating a new fund to improve water quality, as well as 85% of Latino registered voters also support regulations to protect outdoor workers from extreme heat and cold. This is obviously an issue that impacts a lot of folks on the Western Slope and in rural Colorado, folks that are working in construction and landscaping and roofing. And obviously, clearly, Latino registered voters support passing progressive policies that are going to protect workers against some of these extreme temperatures. I'll go ahead and share my screen as well here in this, so that we can continue the presentation. Sorry about that, folks.
Yeah, and while you're doing that, Alex, I'll just let folks know that we will be taking questions at the end, so you can put them in the Q&A or via chat. We've already got one in there. And also today's webinar is being recorded so that if you need it for your purposes afterwards, we can provide you a copy. Just reach out to me and I'll put my email in the chat for any of you who would like that.
Great, and I'll continue. I see that Dr. Sanchez was almost to the end, so we were almost concluding. As Dr. Sanchez alluded, we did test at least 2 ballot issues in this poll. Amendment 79, as you heard, strong support for protecting abortion rights and using state dollars to be able to pay for abortion care. We also tested Amendment J, which the question on the ballot will be, shall there be an amendment to the Colorado Constitution removing the ban on same-sex marriage? And there's strong support by Latino registered voters, 58% supporting Amendment J. Another point that I think our pollster wanted to speak to is sort of the political attitudes and the civic engagement questions that we oftentimes test. There's a battery of questions that we oftentimes ask in a lot of these polls, including how Latina and Latino registered voters in Colorado feel about the direction that the country's going versus the state versus counties. You see that generally speaking, for the federal side, 51% of registered voters in Colorado believe that the country is going in the wrong direction. And interesting, when it comes to the state and local county governments, you see that there's stronger support more on the positive side. 49% of Latino registered voters believing that the state is actually moving in the right direction. And at the county level, 50% of Latino registered voters believe that their county government is going in the right direction. One of the benefits about the Colorado Latino Policy Agenda report is that we break down by congressional district and by region. So there are nuances when it comes to each congressional district in each region. So we invite, obviously, the press and members of the community to look further into those nuances to sort of see what the differences are by congressional district and region. Dr. Sanchez was alluding to sort of the political ideology that we're not Texas, we're not Florida. 36% of Latino voters turned more liberal in the last 4 years compared to only 25% turn more conservative? Every single year we ask this question. We are also going to release a longitudinal analysis of 4 years that will probably get more into the nuances of what Dr. Sanchez said, which we are seeing also approximately a 5% movement from independents to Republicans over the 4 years in terms of registration. But in terms of how people identify themselves and whether they are turning more liberal or more conservative, we're also seeing in the data that, again, 36% of Latino voters are turning more liberal versus only 25% who are turning more conservative. You see that obviously the majority of registered or Latino voters who are registered with the party, 48% tend to be Democrat. That number tends to be steady throughout our 4 years, roughly at about 48 and 50%. And then Republicans have been anywhere between 20% to now 25%. And again, a lot of independents within the Latino community as well. Moving into whether Latinos are excited to vote in this election, you see that 65% of Latinos Latino registered voters in Colorado suggest that they are 100% likely to vote, which is great. And you see the nuances by congressional district. Again, the beauty of the Colorado Latino Policy Agenda is you can go deeper into regions and deeper into congressional district to see the nuances within the regions. But this obviously shows that Latina and Latino voters are engaged and want to participate. 65% is probably too low for our organizational opinion as Voces Unidas, and to be able to get the most out of the Latino electorate, we obviously have some work to do. It's reinforced by our data. Consistently, year after year, we see that there's low contact rates between Latinos and political systems, Latinos and nonprofits that do voter registration work, for example, or Latinos in candidates, where political parties, candidates, and community organizations are not reaching the Latino electorate at the levels that we should. You see on this slide how the contact rates vary. For example, in CD3, Congressional District 3, 52% of Latino registered voters in Congressional District 3 had not been reached by a friend, family, or coworker, had not been reached by a community advocacy organization, had not been reached by a representative of a political party, had not been reached by someone, either the candidate or a representative of a candidate, which means that 52% of those voters in Congressional District 3 still are not as engaged and will be disenfranchised from the elections and political processes if that rate continues. You can go into our data again to see the nuances by congressional district, by question, as well as by region.
And Alex Gabe is back with us now.
Oh.
Just wanted to flag that for you.
Sorry, Dr. Sanchez, do you want to take over?
Yeah, I appreciate you, man. You sounded just as good as I would have done it, so you were awesome. And I think just to close this out, one of the things that you can do across any of the measures from the survey is break things down by congressional district. Again, enough sample size to be able to do that. Just to highlight some, we know CD8, right, being the salient district that it is, represented by the first Latina ever elected in Colorado. One of the things to point out that you saw on the last slide is when you have a Latino elected to office, they typically do better at mobilizing Latinos, and you saw that on the last slide. CD8 was the area where you saw Latinos least likely to say they have not been contacted. We also see some important nuances in Congressional District 8, including they're the most likely to rank gun violence as one of their top 5 concerns, more likely than any other congressional districts. They're the most likely to support asylum for all immigrants that are facing trauma in their own home countries at 75%. A couple other things to highlight, again, when you have a Latino descriptive representative, one of their own in office, it generates positive attitudes towards civic engagement. And you see CD8 respondents were the most likely at 72% to say they are certain to vote, 8% higher than the overall state of Colorado. Residents are also more likely to support reforming the Medicaid application process to have a single state office. You see 10% greater likelihood in CD8 than across the board in the rest of the congressional districts in the state. Preferences for tax cuts, 12% greater. And finally, CD8 respondents are the most supportive of across all districts in Colorado of having insurance and government plans like Medicaid be able to pay for safe and legal abortion. So they're the most supportive of ensuring everybody, regardless of their income level, has access to that very important aspect of reproductive health care. I think that rounds us out. Thank you, Alex, for picking up while I lost Wi-Fi for that hot minute. Hopefully that was not a disruption to the overall presentation.
Thanks. And then Dusty, I think we'll hear from you now.
Yes, thank you all. So in addition to concerns around the economy, immigration, gun violence, our polling identified the need for continued access to affordable healthcare and reproductive healthcare services in our state. We've long known, and Gabe mentioned that we've tested on this for all 4 years. We've known that restricting access to safe, legal abortion puts people in dangerous situations and goes against the desires of Latino voters in our state. And this year's poll statistically reinforces the importance that our community places on the freedom to make their own decisions and self-determine if, when, and how they curate our families. Even as access diminishes in other states, there is significant support, 77%, for access to reproductive health care for all Coloradans, regardless of immigration status. And the vast majority of Latino voters, 61%, favor guaranteeing the right to an abortion in the Colorado Constitution, which is Amendment 79, which we are co-chairing. And they also show strong support for expanding state-funded insurance programs to cover abortion care as a way to address economic and systemic inequities impacting Latinas' abilities to lead safe, healthy, and self-determined lives. And now I will turn it back over to Alex.
Great, thank you, Dusty. And I also want to thank BSP and Dr. Sanchez here for their partnership over the last 4 years. More importantly, we want to thank the 1,600 Latino registered voters who participated, obviously, in this poll for sharing their thoughts, their opinions on the issues that matter most to their communities in those respective regions and congressional districts. As you've heard, after 4 years of research, the trends of economic challenges facing Colorado Latinos is well established, and action from officials at all levels, local, state, and federal, is overdue. Likewise, Latino voters in Colorado continue to rank protection of immigrant rights as a top policy priority for federal officials. This year, as you've heard from Dr. Sanchez, following up on the baseline established in 2023, showing high support for common sense reforms that better support long-term undocumented immigrants, we also tested additional policy approaches, as you've heard, around immigration. And some of these immigration concepts and proposals have been referenced in Project 2025, for example. In Colorado, Latinos oppose authoritarian approaches to enforcement, like mass deportation of undocumented immigrants and separating families at the border, for example. Colorado Latinos prefer common sense approaches, like increasing immigration judges to adjudicate cases faster, legal immigration pathways via family and employment-based visas. And there's still strong support for providing asylum to immigrants fleeing violence and wars in their own home countries. With fresh data, like every year when we release about new priorities for Latinos, this year report allows us to further expand on our research base dating back to 2021, as we work with elected officials and the community leaders across the state to recommend and explore solutions for the future. We hope that every single elected leader across the state will take the data and recommendations to heart when considering, obviously, those needs. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here with us. We'll turn it over to Curtis to open it up for questions.
Yeah, thank you. And just one more reminder that if you do have a question, feel free to submit it via Q&A or raise your hand and we can unmute you. The first question that we have is from Sarah Wilson. And Sarah asks, for housing questions, did the survey break down responses by renter versus owner status? And do we have an idea of how many Latino voters are homeowners? And did we ask about specific policy ideas around housing?
Yeah, I'll start and note that in terms of policy issues regarding housing, last year's survey, which we can definitely give you those results if you don't have access to them, had a huge battery on a range of different housing policy issues. This time around, we essentially wanted to test whether or not those were having a positive impact, as you saw. So between the 2 years, I think we've got answers to just about every single policy issue related to housing that's been considered in the state of Colorado. So we can get you those numbers from 2023 if it's helpful.
And what I would say, Sarah, we do release 11 reports of crosstabs. And so if you look at the demographic report that should be available now online, on our main website, you should be able to find this very question and find that based on home ownership or renters. And as we've talked about in prior years, we care deeply about both home ownership or folks who own homes currently, and then renters, recognizing that economic wealth and economic mobility and home ownership is critical. And there's a lot of struggles and a lot of policy solutions that renters also need and protections. So, we do put a lot of emphasis on that. So you should be able to find that in the data. If not, feel free to reach out to us and we'll point to some of those nuances.
Thanks. And Nick Coltrane asks, how do you think about the different effective, not effective splits on affordable housing between CD8 and CD5? And we'll take that one first, and then he's got a follow-up.
Yeah, I think in the context of being able to analyze by congressional district, I'll say first, one of the things I know Alex and Dusty and myself talked about is being a little bit cautious at some of the smaller sample size congressional districts like CD5, right, have a much smaller sample size than CD8. But what we can say is, given the significant difference, obviously region matters and place matters, right? And the range of housing costs and how it's impacting the lives of Latinos varies depending on where they live. And obviously folks in CD8 feel a more rosy and more positive about the costs where they live, affordability, relative to folks in some of the other congressional districts.
And then the follow-up question is, do you have any insight into why people think the country is heading in the right or wrong directions? Are there particularly salient points, including those that might be at odds with each other?
Yeah, I'll start with that one and let my colleagues fill in any gaps. But the story, the way I see it in the data, is clearly the economy is the #1 issue for Latino registered voters. That's what they're thinking about in their daily lives. That's what they're thinking about when we ask them about who you're going to vote for, et cetera. So clearly, when you ask them, is the country going in the right or wrong direction? My perception is a lot of that is having to do with the state of the economy. And again, not like big picture, GDP, how's the stock market doing at the family level? How is the economy doing? And unfortunately, you've seen in the data, a large segment of Latinos, a third, indicate their personal financial situation has gotten worse over the last year. And I think that's partly what's driving that perception that the country is still continually heading in the wrong direction. I think a lot of that is the state of the economy.
Good. Our next question is from Jesse Paul. And he points out that the poll was conducted in July and August, and he wonders if we have a sense of how opinions have changed since President Biden exited the presidential race, and also after the first Harris-Trump debate.
And I'll start, if I could, Dr. Sanchez, and then turn it over to you. Recognize that this is our policy poll. This policy poll is always in July. We do have a more, so we also do exit polls on midterm and presidential years. So you should also expect a robust survey be conducted leading up to election on actual folks who have voted in this election. And we also do the large sample polling, and we're probably the only ones in Colorado that do so, where we have 600 Latina and Latino voters. And we get into the nuances of why they voted the way they voted and who do they vote for, and what was important to them at the time of voting. And so I think you're going to see some of that data be released after the election from our exit poll. But the policy poll is less about the election and more about every single year what's at the mind of Latino voters as it relates to policy solutions to be able to help improve the conditions across the regions and across the congressional districts.
Perfect answer, Alex. The only thing that I'll add to that is we do know from national data that we've collected at BSP that the item that probably has been impacted the most since the shift to Harris at the top of the ticket is enthusiasm levels. You saw us walk through that, right? Relatively high enthusiasm. That's even higher now with Harris on the top of the ticket. The subgroup where we're seeing the most action is among Latinas. Voter registration has jumped significantly, particularly among young Latinas across the country. I would expect the same thing to be playing out here in Colorado. So that's the item that I think you're most likely to see some movement on based on that top of the ticket shift. As Alex noted in the November poll, stay tuned for that. We'll have a lot more content that can directly address that question.
Thanks. And our next question is from Robert Tan. And Robert asks if there's any insight into why voters seem to be more supportive of the direction of their local communities versus nationwide. Are voters perhaps seeing more tangible solutions to their issues from local officials and organizations than they are from the federal government?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? I think for better or worse, Latinos in Colorado perceive that their state and local governments are doing a better job of being responsive to their issues and concerns than the federal government is. We have a saying as political scientists, all politics is local, right? And I think that also is reflective of that dynamic. Latinos, like anybody else, are more likely to know, who their county commissioner is, who their local level official is. They're also more likely to have somebody that looks like them in those local offices than somebody at the federal level outside of congressional district 8. So I think all of those things matter. And, at the end of the day, you all should be proud of the fact that Latinos perceive their state government and their local governments are doing a, relatively speaking, better job than the feds.
We do have time for a few more questions. So if you would like to put anything else in the Q&A or raise your hand, we can unmute you and call on you. So we'll give you just a couple of seconds here if there are follow-ups or additional questions. Lucas Woods asks, did we ask about any other ballot measures, and why did we focus on the two that were mentioned?
That is correct. We only tested 2 ballot questions, and mostly it's because of the timing. So as you know, in July, and as we get prepped for that July poll, we're in the field for a month, as Dr. Sanchez alluded, right? It's one of the largest rural and urban polls on Latinas and Latinos. It takes a full month to be in the field. So because of the timing, we did not know all the ballot questions that would be official and approved by election day, but we clearly knew that there were 2 issues that from a racial justice standpoint, we knew that it would impact Latinas and Latinos across the state. And we have been polling on same-sex marriage. We have been polling on abortion care and reproductive justice for 4 years consistently. And so we wanted to make sure that we had more recent data when the question is posed the way we believe that time in July would be in front of voters in November.
Thanks, Alex. Other questions? As a reminder, we have posted a link to the website where you can find the press release, the PDF of today's report, top lines and crosstabs online here in the chat. We'll also be sending those out via email. My email is in the chat, so if you need anything, a recording of today's event or follow-up questions, happy to provide those. We will give you one last call for questions. And seeing none, I will turn it back over to our panelists for any final thoughts and remarks today. Alex, we want to pitch it back to you.
Great. No, just want to thank you all for joining us today. And for those of you who have followed this body of work over the last 4 years, we're always available, Voces Unidas, as well as Color, with our partner BSP Research throughout the year as we explore and begin to implement and have candid conversations in the community about the voices of 1,600 registered voters as it comes to policy. Thank you so much. Dusty?
And Dusty.
Nothing more to add other than just thank you. And I think one of the main reasons, I guess I do have something to add. One of the main reasons that we do this poll, there's many reasons, but one of them is to help inform our work. And so we use this as something that helps determine our policy priorities and our work with policymakers. And so, we will continue to use this data. We are here, as Alex mentioned, and we look forward to sharing the exit poll with all of you in November. So thanks for joining us today.
Good. And Gabe, any final remarks from you?
I won't have much else to say other than to thank all of you for participating as participants in the webinar. I think Alex and Dusty's team have ensured with their support of this poll every year, that the Latino voice is included in policymaking decisions that are important to the state of Colorado. You all play a vital role in making sure those voices reflected in the data get represented in how the media talks about the policy issues across the state of Colorado. So thank you for being part of that process to ensure that Latinos, again, second fastest growing electorate in the state of Colorado, huge population in terms of overall importance to the state of Colorado's voice is included in all those important discussions. Thank you.
And thank you from me to everyone who joined us today. We appreciate your time and attention and look forward to having you join us at future webinars on the research of the Colorado Latino Agenda. Take care.